it took me 5 years to get to this point right now. Nobody believes me. Everybody thinks I'm crazy, dude. Everybody.
I'm supposed to be meeting a treasure hunter, but it's been about 3 hours and he has not showed up. I should probably explain what I was doing at the top of that mountain. I was there to find gold. Or actually, I was there to meet a guy who was there to find gold. This is Roger. Roger is a professional treasure hunter. At first, he was pretty legit. He had been researching this trip for 5 years, and he had a treasure map from 1847. Roger also gave me a mysterious burlap sack to carry, which contained centuries-old technology that he planned to use to find gold, but more on that later. See, I met up with Roger at the base of the Superstition Mountains, which is home to the Lost Dutchman gold mine, a mythical vein of gold that dozens of people have died trying to find. The National Forest Service calls these mountains the most dangerous mountain range in America. It is intensely remote. There's nobody out here. Super remote. So after showing up a couple hours late and very exhausted, Roger led me to the site of where he believed the gold was buried. We sat down for a bit and pretty quickly things got kind of weird.
For some reason, the government doesn't want us to know that the Egyptians were around here thousands, probably 100,000 years ago, or even longer than that. Who knows?
So after just a couple hours with Roger, my interest shifted from discovering gold to discovering what it was about this place that made people so obsessed with the idea of finding gold. Was there actually gold out here? Well, all the signs point to yes. A couple hundred years ago, there was actually a gold mine in this area. But since then, fact and fiction have blurred, which is why I was skeptical when Roger said stuff like this.
They believe that the Ark of the Covenant is right there.
It was up to me to separate fiction like that from facts like this. In the late 1800s, a German immigrant named Jacob Waltz lived around here. He was known for occasionally bringing very pure gold into town, which he would spend on whiskey and groceries and entertainment. Local folks started to question how it was that this strange man had so much money, and they determined that he had, at his disposal, access to an endless vein of gold, known as the Lost Dutchman's gold mine, and that is what Roger and I were in search of. Also, quick side note, this Dutchman was not actually Dutch, he was German, or Deutsch, or Deutschman, and back in the late 1800s, Dutchman and Deutschman just sort of mixed together because who really cared back then, I guess? Continuing on, Waltz died in 1891, but before he died, he allegedly revealed clues about the mine's location to his caretaker, a young woman named Julia Thomas who ran a bakery in the local town. After he passed, Julia Thomas sold her bakery, organized an expedition, and spent 5 weeks in the Superstition Mountains. That expedition was unsuccessful, but in order to raise funds for another expedition, she started to sell maps that allegedly pointed to the location of the Lost Dutchman's mine, and she sold them for $7 each, which today is about $250. Julia Thomas would occasionally talk to the press about what she knew regarding this hidden gold, and I found one of the original interviews from 1895 in the San Francisco Chronicle. I've transcribed it and I've shared it on my Patreon, which, by the way, you should really check out. It's linked below, and it has all kinds of fun facts and information that I can't get to in these episodes. I also share a lot more art and painting, so feel free to check that out. And while you're at it, if you could hit like and subscribe, that really does help this channel grow so that I can go do dumb stuff like climbing mountains and looking for gold with Roger. And speaking of Roger, let me tell you about his map. The map that Roger was using was first discovered in 1952, and in true treasure hunt fashion, it was left in the form of a puzzle. It's called the Peralta mappa, but even that Peralta name is somewhat controversial. See, that name Peralta was actually made up by a con man named James Revis in 1882, who claimed that he was a descendant of this powerful Peralta family and that he had claimed to land in Arizona. Obviously, that wasn't true, and he was called out and actually imprisoned, but that is the first time we start to hear this Peralta name floating around the Southwest. In 1895, there's a map with a Peralta mine listed on it, but no one's really sure what that refers to. And then comes the Peralta mappa, which is this kind of strange and quasi-scientific thing. So the Peralta mappa claims that there are stone tablets in the Superstition Mountains that mark the site of the gold. So as for the stone tablets, there are 2 red sandstone tablets and a heart-shaped rock. So nobody can really agree on where they came from and where this myth started. They can't even agree on when they were first found. I found different sources, one saying 1946, another saying 1952, and another saying 1956. So pretty quickly, we're back in conspiracy theory. But even before those stones were discovered, the Lost Dutchman's treasure was attracting believers, including one man who may have actually found it. In the summer of 1931, a 66-year-old amateur explorer named Adolf Ruth hobbled into the Superstition Mountains on a cane, and he was carrying the exact same map that Roger was using. 6 months after Adolf Ruth entered the mountains, a search party found his skull with 2 bullet holes lodged into it. Next to his skull was his notebook, which had inside it a note written in his own handwriting with directions to the mine claiming that he had found it. Now, the national news services picked this up and it spread like wildfire. In the middle of the Great Depression, this was exactly the kind of story and excitement that people needed. So the legend of the Lost Dutchman's mine exploded overnight. But once again, fact and fiction start to get mixed up here because that note that they found, the same note that set off the national frenzy, the one that made people believe that Adolf Ruth had died because he found the mine, was almost certainly just a copy of a newspaper article from an interview with Julia Thomas. The directions to the mine were actually published in the San Francisco Chronicle way back in 1895, so the most likely truth is that those notes that were sitting in Ruth's notebook for decades were actually just notes that he had written before he went on the trip. But by then, it didn't matter. The mine, the murder, and the treasure were all real because people wanted to believe they were real. The story, the fiction, had become more important than the truth itself. In the following 3 decades, 8 people went missing or died trying to find this gold, and as my time with Roger went on, I started to wonder if we might end up in a similar situation. And it was around this time that I realized Roger didn't have a metal detector, and when I asked him about it, he referred to that mysterious burlap sack that he asked me to carry. Remember that one? Well, inside that sack were dowsing rods, one of the oldest and most enduring pieces of pseudoscientific folklore in the Western world. They typically consist of 2 L-shaped metal rods. The user holds them loosely, and when they cross or dip, that supposedly signals buried treasure below. The practice dates back to around 15th century Germany, where miners would use these to locate ore veins. It spread across Europe and came to the Americas with the early colonists. By the 19th century, it was deeply embedded in frontier and prospecting culture, exactly the world that Jacob Waltz would have inhabited. The problem is that controlled scientific studies have repeatedly showed that dowsing rods perform no better than just random chance. And that sort of crossing motion that indicates gold is actually controlled by something called the ideomotor effect, which is unconscious and involuntary muscle movements driven by the user's own expectation and hopes, not by anything in the ground. Now, I'm not always against alternative sciences, but in that moment, I was kind of cold and kind of hungry, and I realized that maybe I don't want to trust my life with this guy for the rest of the night. For me, it was time to make the long trek back to my car and then drive straight to Tacos El Nene. Each year, 8,000 people make their way to the Superstition Mountains to look for the Lost Dutchman's gold mine. The maps that are sold today are derivatives of the ones that Julia Thomas sold back in the 1800s. That gold may very well be real. But along the way, fact and fiction have blended, and today, I believe Roger is chasing more fiction than fact. But hey, who knows? Maybe the real gold is the friends we made along the way. Thank you for watching, and I will see you next time on Painting the Past.
Google Earth used to show you a lot of stuff. They don't show you anymore because they changed the views. They blurred everything. I think because people were starting to find stuff. And people were realizing that there's, like, even in this area, I could take you to a pyramid around the corner here